Hot sauce, keep it dip there. 날 따라 넌 twist it. Hot sauce 타오를 때. 입맛대로 먹어 dish. 너무가 궁금해. 나는 너만의 chef. 이건 너를 위한 plate. Yeah, 내가 맛보여줄게.
Okay, so this Benjamin forced me to, not force, asked me to do that, to share the good things with you guys. Hope you like it. Okay, so let's continue the more interesting thing in accounting, right? Okay, so since we understand the cash dividends, then we have three very important dates about dividends. So what are these three important days about dividends? First is declaration date. Okay, we've mentioned about that. Declare. So declare dividends. So declaration date. Remember, declare, not delete. Declare. Okay, don't delete me. So declaration date is the date you announce the information your company is going to pay the dividends. Okay. And the second day is a record date, 记录日. The third day is the payment date, 支付日. Okay, so for dividends, please remember these three very important dates about dividends. So first, declaration date, 宣告日. Your company declare, release the information, announce it to the shareholders. To the shareholders, okay, the board director determined what's the amount of dividends? For example, $100. The board director determined $100 dividends, and they are going to give the dividends to shareholders. Okay, so that's declaration date. Release, announce the information. And remember, we've mentioned the last video, right? So the declaration date, when you release the information, it means you give the shareholders the promise, right? So you commitment the legal obligations to the shareholders. So what is a legal obligation? It means after you release the information, you cannot cancel it next day. You cannot. Okay? So on this date, that's your liability. Your liability incurred happened already. So that's your liability. Okay? On this day, your liability happened, and what is current liability? Because your company will pay the dividends next month. So that's your current liability. Then what's the second date? Record date. Record date is the date you try to find out who is your boss. Who is your boss? Okay? Why is that? Because if you remember that from the last video, if your company, let me find the video, the slides first. So wait a moment. Okay, I'm back. So for slides 39, we've mentioned this. At the beginning, when your company need the money, so you could sell the shares to the market, right? So the investors, when they bought your shares, they are your shareholders. But after your shares in the market, your shareholders could sell it to anyone they want. So your shares, they are trading in the market, maybe every day, quite often. So it's not your business. But the problem is, when you decide to give your shareholders dividends, do you know who is your shareholders? You don't know that. Why? Because your shares in the market, they will sell it to the other shareholders, other investors. So you don't know who is your boss. That's the problem. So that's why we need the record date. The record date is the day we try to find out the boss. Okay? So let's go back to the slides 107. So we go to our second date. Yeah, record date. Since we don't know who is our boss, since we don't know who is the shareholders, so how could we get a cash dividend to our shareholders? We don't know that. So record date is we try to determine ownership. Determining ownership is we try to find out who is the shareholder. Okay? So you will ask your shareholder come to tell you they are your shareholders. So you will try to find out their name. After that, then you could pay the cash dividend to your shareholders, okay? So the record date, you didn't do anything. You just try to find out your shareholder's name. So it's not about, they won't affect your financial conditions, right? Since they won't affect your financial conditions, do you need to record it, or do you need to do any accounting jobs? You don't need to. So no journal entry is required on this date. So it means you don't need to do any accounting jobs. Okay, so next date, payment date. So it's the day you really pay the cash to your shareholders. Then you should record these situations. Okay, so there's 3 days. So declaration date is the date you release the information to shareholders to tell them the good news. Your company is going to pay the cash dividend to them in the future. And don't forget, on this day, because you release the information, so your current liability increase. Okay? And a few days later, that's your record date. You try to find out the boss. Who is your boss? Okay, so they won't affect your financial positions. They won't affect your financial situations. So in accounting, do you need to do anything? You don't need to do anything. Then next month, finally, you pay the cash dividend to your shareholders. Okay, so that's your payment date. You pay the cash dividends. Okay, so for these 3 days, let me give you a simple case, how to record it in accounting way. Okay, so let's look at the case. We have 3 days, right? Declare date, record date, and payment date. So if we assume you decide to give your shareholders cash dividend, so it's cash dividend. How much? $0.5 per share. I just mentioned when we talk about the dividends, we use this rate to tell shareholders how much they will get, right? So $0.5 per share. Okay, and totally your company have 100 shares. First question, could you tell me these 100 shares? We mean issue shared or outstanding shares. Okay, we give shareholders dividends. And these 100 shares, we mean issue shares or outstanding shares. Who had the right? Who will get the cash dividends? Is issue shares or outstanding shares? Yeah, we've mentioned, right? Should be outstanding shares. It means what? We don't pay any dividends to treasury shares. Okay, if you still remember that. If you forgot, you should go back to the last video. We talk about it with a lot of time. So here, we talk about it. Your cash dividends, we don't pay to treasury shares. If you forgot, please go back to the last video to take a look. And okay. Oh, so let's go back to here. So we talk about the 100 shares, even though we didn't tell you is issue share or is outstanding share, but you should understand is outstanding shares because we don't pay any dividends to treasury share. Okay, so for the first day, you should know what's the effect for your company, right? So what's the effect for your company? Declare date means at this date, your liability happened already because you give them your promise already. So what's your first effect? First effect, that's your liability, right? And this liability is about dividends. So we'll give you a new account. We call it dividend payable. Dividends payable. 应付鼓励。Okay, so that's the first effect. Your dividend payable increase. Why? Because you give them promise. When you give them promise, your liability increase. So what's the second effect? You should tell them the reasons why your liability increase. What's the reason? The reason is because you give them cash dividends. So you should tell them because of cash dividends happened. Because of this thing, cash dividend happened. So that's why your liability increase. Okay? So that's the two effects for your company. Then, what's the journal entry we use? Cash dividends. If you forgot, cash dividends should be on debit. So debit, cash dividends. Credit, liability, right? Liability increase on credit. So this liability is dividend payable. Dividends payable. Okay, then how much? 0.5 per share times 100 outstanding shares. So it should be $50. So cash dividend $50. Dividend payable $50. Okay, so that's a journal entry we use. And for this chapter, please, the effects on equity is quite important. So let's look at the effects. Okay, so what are the effects? If you don't know that, you just look at debit first, credit later, and use the debit credit to analyze your effects. So for the debit, do you know when your dividend increase? Dividend increase means what? Return earning decrease, right? Return is decrease means what? Means equity decrease. Okay, so what's the second effect? Your dividend payable increase. Dividend payable increase means what? That's your liability. And this liability is current or non-current? Current. So your current liability increase. Okay, so that's for declaration date, 宣告日. How about the second date, record date? For the record date, do we need to do anything in accounting? No, you don't need to do anything because you just try to find out your boss shareholders, so they won't affect your financial situations, so you don't need to do anything. How about the payment date? Payment date, you pay the dividends, you pay the cash to shareholders, right? So what's the first effect? You pay the cash, right? So your cash should be decreased. So what's the second effect? Your liability should be decreased, right? Because on declaration date, you told them that's your liability. Okay? Right now, finally, you pay the liability, you pay the dividend. So your liability should be decreased, right? So your dividend payable, your liability should be decreased. Okay, so write down your journal entry. So what's a journal entry? Debit what? Credit what? Liability decrease on debit, right? So dividends payable decrease. How much? $50. You pay the cash. How much? $50. Again, please, what's the effect for your equity, for your company's financial statements? Liability decrease. So dividends payables decrease. Means what? Means your current liability decrease. Okay? How about your cash? Cash decrease, right? It means what? Your current asset decrease. Okay, so that's the effect for each date. But could you tell me what's the cumulative effects? Cumulative effect means add up these two effects together. Okay? So what are the cumulative effects? Add up these two together. So that's a cumulative effect. (累积效果，累积影响。So cumulative effects 累积影响，累积影响。Sorry about my ugly words. So you just add up these two together. So what are the effects? Your liability declaration date increased, right? But right now you paid the dividends back already, so your liability will be no effects, right? So what's the effect is your retained earnings decrease, then your equity decrease, right? So that's the first effect. Second effect, because from declaration date, current liability increase, but for the payment date, current liability decrease. So they canceled each other, make your liability, current liability, no effects. Okay, so how about the third one? The third one is you have a cash, right? So your cash decrease, then your current asset decrease. Okay, so there's an effect for each one and the effect for cumulative effect. So it means here you just add up declaration date, declaration and payment. So you got the total effects after the whole process. Okay. Okay, so if you need to write down the note, take your time to write down the note. Hope it's okay for you to read the note. Okay, so if no problem for this one, then please go to your note. Please go to your note on page 14. So please finish sorry, not 14, 15. So please go to your note 15 and take your time and finish the page and finish the page 15. Okay, so please pause the video. Finish the note on page 15. After you finish, then go back to the video again, okay? So pause it. Okay, hope you finish it by yourself. Then here's a transaction when your company pay the cash dividends to the shareholders. Okay. So let's look at the transactions. Here is the declaration date. So what is the declaration date? The declaration date is on February 1st, 2020. So on this date, your company decided to give the shareholders $0.5 per share cash dividends. Okay? And how many shares your company have? 100 shares. 100,000 shares. Sorry, 100,000 shares. But you should know that 100,000 shares will mean outstanding shares. Okay? Because you won't pay the dividends to treasury shares. Okay, so how much for the total cash dividends? 0.5 per share. Then, oh, wait a moment. Okay, sorry, I make a mistake. So it's 0.5 times what? times your outstanding shares. How many? 100,000 outstanding shares. So you got the total cash dividends you should pay to the shareholders is $50,000. Okay? And then make your cash dividends increase, right? So that's the first effect. Because of that, you have a liability dividend payable increase. Okay? Then your journal entry debit cash dividend, credit dividend payable, $50,000. How about your second date, recall date? You don't need to do anything. So you just skip this date. How about the third date, payment date? Finally, next year, or next month, maybe it's better to call it next month, January 20th, 2021. So on this day, you decide to pay the dividends to shareholders, right? So when you decide to pay it, that means your cash decrease, right? And liability dividends payable should be decrease. Okay? So that's why we put journal entries debit dividend payable because liability decrease. And you pay the cash. So cash decrease $50,000. Okay? So that's a journal entry is not that difficult, right? But what's the effect for your balance sheet on declaration date? Because cash dividend may return earnings decrease. That will make your equity decrease. Dividends payable make your liability increase, right? And for record date, you don't need to care about it because it's not about accounting. So payment date, because you pay the cash, right? So your cash decrease. At the same time, you don't owe shareholders dividends anymore. So liability decrease. Okay? So what's the cumulative effect? You add up declaration date and payment date. So you will find out your retained earnings decrease, equity decrease, your cash decrease. Okay, so there's the effects on your balance sheet when you pay the cash dividends. So that's about the cash dividends. Then we talk about another issue, dividends, cash dividends. Do you remember when your company decided to pay cash dividends? We have two shareholders. They have the right to get the cash dividends, right? So who are these two shareholders? They have the right to get the cash dividends. Preference shareholders, 特别股股东 and ordinary shareholders, 普通股股东 right? So who is the true boss? Ordinary shareholders is the true boss, right? True boss. So your preference shareholders, 特别股股东, they are not the true boss, but our company give preference shareholders two priorities, right? 特别股股东有两个优先权。So do you remember for preference shareholders, they have two priorities. So what are these two priorities since they are not the true boss? Okay, so let's go to in the beginning of this chapter, we've mentioned that for your preference shareholders, 特别股股东, so for the preference shareholders, they are not your true boss, but we give them two priorities. So what are these two priorities? First is dividend preference, 股利优先权. Means what? If today your company is going to pay cash dividends, who has the right to get the cash dividend first? Preference shareholders. Okay? After preference shareholders got the cash dividends, true boss, you will get the remaining. So you will get the remaining. Okay, so that's the first priority for preference shareholders. So what are the second priority? Liquidation preference 剩余财产分配权 Liquidation preference 剩余财产分配权 is when your company go bankruptcy. So when your company go bankruptcy, your company is going to sold out all of the assets, right? And will get some cash back. So when your company gets some cash back, for this cash, your company should pay to creditors first. Okay? So you should pay to the creditors first. After creditors, you should pay to the preferential holders 特别股股东 So two balls, you are the last one. Okay, so for these two kind of priority, the preferential holders have. Okay, so when we talk about the cash dividends, so who has the right to get the cash dividends first? Preferential holders, 特别股股东. Okay, so we talk about when your company paid that cash dividends, how much? $50,000. So this $50,000 cash dividends is the total amount of cash dividends. Then also we want to talk about for this one, you should pay to the preferential holders first. Preferential holders. Okay? After that, the second is your two boss, ordinary shareholders. Ordinary shareholders. Okay? So we talk about how to pay, how to share, to decide the dividends. So let's go to preferential holders. They have the right. Okay. So how the dividends are allocated to these two classes of investors. How the dividends are allocated to your preferential holders and ordinary shareholders. How? Before you know how, you should understand for the preference shareholders. For the preference shares, we have two kind of preference shares. We have two kind of preference shares. First is non-cumulative 非累积的特别股 Second is cumulated 累积的特别股 Okay, so it means for the preference shares, actually we have two kind of preference shares. First is non-cumulated. Second is cumulated. Okay. So let me summarize the shares again in case you get confused. For companies, when company issue shares, okay? For the company's shares, they have ordinary shares and preference shares, 普通股以及特别股. So for the ordinary shares, we've mentioned this is your true boss. Okay? So how about the preference shares? Preference shares, they are not the true boss. So they want only dividends. Okay, so that's preference shares. And for preference shares right now, you should note preference shares actually they have two kind of preference shares. First is non-cumulated. Non-cumulative preference shares.非累积特别股，非累积特别股。 Okay, so what's the second one? Second one is cumulative preference shares.累积特别股。Okay, so for your company issue shares, you have ordinary shares 普通股 preference shares 特别股 For preference shares, they have two kinds of preference shares. First is non-cumulative 非累积特别股 Second is cumulative 累积特别股 Okay, for preference shares, cumulative, non-cumulative. When your preference shares is cumulative or non-cumulative, these two kind of preference shares, they will affect how to allocate dividends, how to allocate your cash dividends, okay? So these two kind of preference shares, they will affect how to allocate cash dividends. So that's why we talk about these two kind of preference shares here, because they will affect how to allocate cash dividends. Okay, so what are the difference between these two? Non-cumulative and cumulative. Okay, so we will talk about that. So non-cumulative, it means what? It means the preference shareholders will get the dividends only after your company declare dividends. If your company didn't declare dividends, they cannot get dividends forever. So that's non-cumulative preference. Okay, so non-cumulative means if this year your company declare dividends, preference shareholders 特别股东 will get dividends. But if your company did not declare dividends, preference shareholders will get nothing forever. So this year, next year, they won't get any cash dividends. Okay? So that's non-cumulative. So what does that mean? I give it a simple example. Okay, so let's look at this case. If today your company have two kind of shares. First is preference shares, second is ordinary shares. Okay, but for the preference shares right now, if I told you the preference share is non-cumulative 非累积 So non-cumulative 非累积 means what? It's about the dividends. It's about whether the preference shares will get the dividends or not for this year, okay? Or for in the future. So non-cumulative means if this year your company declare cash dividend, 宣告现金股利 declare cash dividends, then you will get cash dividend. But when your company did not declare cash dividends, 没有宣告现金股利 So for non-cumulative preference shareholders, 非累积特别股股东 you will not get this year's cash dividends. Okay? In the future, also you will not get this year's cash dividends. Okay, so for example, let's look at this case. Maybe you will get a more clear idea. So if in 2019, your company declare and paid a cash dividend, $40. Remember, for cash dividend, totally $40. Who has the right to get the cash dividend first? Preference shareholders, right? And how much they will get? On the shares you told preference shareholders what's the amount of cash dividends they will get each year, okay? But the number is fixed. So if you remember that this is the fixed amount of cash dividend they will get, then how much? 5% times 100 is the par value, okay? So 5% times the par value is 100. So the fixed amount of cash dividend is $5. Okay? So that's for one share. So of course, here we just assume one share. If you have 10 shares, you need to times 10 shares, okay? So here just for one share. So in case you don't know that, this is for one share. So it means what? In 2019, your preference shareholders will get the cash dividends. How much? 5% times par value 100. So they get $5 a share, okay? Then how about your both ordinary shareholders? The both ordinary shares, you got the remaining. So the remaining will be how much? Totally $40 cash dividends, right? Minus the dividend you give to preference shareholders. So you got the remaining. The remaining will be $35. Okay? So you are the boss. If today you run the business better, you will get the cash dividends more. But if you run the business bad, then you will get the cash dividends less. Okay? So it depends on your company. Depends on yourself. So this for the shareholders, you got the remaining, right? For the ordinary shareholders, you got the remaining. The remaining could be higher if your company have a good performance, right? The remaining could be lower if your company have the bad performance. And good performance, bad performance depends on who? Depends on the boss, right? So you are the boss. If you run the company good, you have a good performance, then you will get more dividends. Okay? If you run the company bad, you will have a bad performance, then you will have a less or zero, maybe zero dividends, maybe. Okay. So that's for the first year. How about the second year, 2020? If the second year your company didn't declare cash dividends, it means your company is not going to pay any cash dividends for the second year, 2020. So it means what? It means for preference shareholders, they got nothing. They got zero because your company didn't declare cash dividends. Your company is not to pay dividends this year. Then you are the preference shareholders, especially you are non-cumulative. You are non-cumulative preference shareholders. You got nothing. Okay? So how about the both ordinary shareholders? Of course you got nothing because this year your company didn't pay any cash dividends. How about the third year, 2021? If the third year your company declare and pay cash dividend $30, for the $30, how could we allocate the $30 to preference shareholders, to ordinary shareholders? Okay? Because for the preference shareholders, they are non-cumulative. So non-cumulative means what? Means even though last year preference shareholders got nothing, could they ask your company to pay the cash dividends from last year? No, cannot. So non-cumulative means they could only get the cash dividends only for this year. So this year, your company declared, paid a cash dividend, they got it. If your company didn't declare and pay cash dividend, then they got nothing. Okay? So for the non-cumulative preference shareholders, 非累积特别股股东，他们只拿到今年的股利，所以今年有宣告，他就拿到股利；今年没有宣告，他就没有拿到了。所以呢，以后从此也拿不到今年的，因为这个股利没有累积，股利没有累积就是只针对当年。OK? So for the 3rd year, they just got $5 a share. So that's the fixed cash dividends, fixed amount of cash dividends for preference shareholders. Okay, so they just got a cash dividends only for this year. They cannot get the cash dividends from the previous years, no more. So how about your ordinary shareholders, your boss? You got the remaining, right? So what's the remaining? Is $30 minus you give to non-cumulative preference shareholders, 非累积特别股股东 $5. So you got the remaining is 25. Okay? So that's non-cumulative preference shareholders, 非累积特别股。Okay? So how about the second kind of preference shareholders? Second one is what? Cumulative preference. Cumulative preference shares. Okay? 累积特别股。So what's the difference? The difference is, do you find out the keyword cumulated? It means if you cannot get the dividends in 2020, that dividends you did not get in 2020, you will get it in the future when company declare and paid cash dividends. Okay? So it means the dividends could be cumulated to next year, to the future. 累积特别股是指今年没有拿到的股利，没关系，可以累积到未来，等到未来公司发放股利的时候一起还给你，这个叫累积特别股。Okay, so let's look at the case. Maybe you will get more clear idea. Okay, so let's look at the case. If today you had the preference shares, but the share is cumulative, 累积的。So means what? If you cannot get the dividends this year, you will get it eventually in the future. Okay? So the same case, let's look at what's the difference. In 2019, the first year, if the company declare and pay the cash dividend $40, so means what? No matter you are non-cumulative preference shares or you are cumulative preference shares, you will get the dividends if this year your company declare and pay cash dividends, right? Okay. 所以不管累积或非累积特别股，只要今年宣告发放现金股利，没有影响嘛，你就拿到自己应该拿的。所以有影响在哪里？有影响在公司没有发放股利的那一年，这才会有影响。Okay? So for the first year, 2019, you still got a fixed amount. How much? $5 a share. So how about the second year? The second year, because your company did not clear cash dividends, right? So of course, because they did not declare cash dividends, so you cannot get any cash, right, for your preference shares. Of course, you cannot. But remember, because you are cumulative. So what does it mean, cumulative? 累积. This year, even though you didn't get the cash dividends, right? But company have to pay their dividends to you in the future. So for the $5 you didn't get it this year, the company have to pay back in the future. So for the $5, company has to pay in the future. Okay? So they see in the future, the third year, finally, your company declare and pay cash dividend $30. Okay, so for cumulative preference shareholders, 累积特别股股东, how much they will get? They will get $5. This $5 is from previous year. Also, they will get $5 from this year. Okay, so that's from this year. So totally, how much they will get? $10 for cumulative preference shareholders. 累积特别股股东. Okay, so that $5 from 2020 because your company owed cash dividends to, remember, cumulative, only for cumulative preference shareholders. (累积特别股股东) Okay, so they $5 from last year because the company owed cumulative preference shareholders cash dividends. Okay, and how about the second $5? Second $5 is to pay the cash dividends for this year. For this year, 2021. Okay. So did you find out the difference between cumulative and non-cumulative? The difference is whether preference shareholders will get their $5 cash dividends back, okay, if the company didn't declare and pay cash dividends. Okay, so that's a key difference, cumulative and non-cumulative. So for the $5, company owed their $5. We call it dividend in arrear. Dividends in arrear. Okay? Okay, so the $5 in 2020, the company owed to the preference shareholders, their $5, we call it dividends in arrear, 积欠股利. So the $5 is dividend in arrear, 积欠股利. So in the future, next year, when your company declare and pay the cash dividend to shareholders, don't forget you should pay the $5 back to the cumulative preference shareholders. Okay? So totally, the preference shareholders, they will get $10. So how to get it $10? Is $5 dividends in arrears and $5 this year's cash dividends. Okay? So dividends in arrears plus cash dividends this period. So that's totally $10. So based on this case, could you tell me for ordinary shareholders how much they will get? They got remaining, right? So they got the remaining will be $20, right? So will be $20. So based on this, for ordinary shareholders, they got remaining. So remaining will be totally $30 minus $10 to cumulative preference shareholders, so they got remaining only $20. So that's for your both ordinary shareholders. Okay, so that's how we allocate the cash dividends to your preference shareholders and to your ordinary shareholders. Okay, so if you need to write down the note, I give you a time. So this part is when you talk about non-cumulative preference shareholders, 非累积特别股股东。For non-cumulative preference shareholders, how we allocate the cash dividends to shareholders, okay? To preference shareholders, 特别股股东 to ordinary shareholders, 普通股股东 Okay. Then, when your preference shareholders, they are cumulative. So remember, when they are cumulative, then for the third year, totally they got $10. Okay? First year they got $5 the same. They won't change. It doesn't matter you are cumulative or non-cumulative. Because you got a fixed amount of cash dividend, $5. Second year, still you got nothing because the company didn't pay the cash dividend. So of course you got nothing. But the key difference is the third year. Because you got nothing but that $5, eventually the company have to pay back. So the key difference is the third year. Third year, cumulative preference shareholders will get totally $10. Okay? First $5 is the dividends in arrears. Second $5 is this year's cash dividends. So totally $10. Then they will affect the money ordinary shareholders will get. They get the remaining. So the remaining only $20. Okay, so that's a difference. So if you need to write down the note, pause the video, write down the note by yourself. So that's why we mention cumulative and non-cumulative, because they will affect how to allocate the cash dividends. Okay? So here is cumulative preference shareholders. Then they will have the right to get what? To get any unpaid previous year's dividends. So any unpaid previous year's dividends, that's dividends in arrears. Okay, so that's what we mentioned. Dividends in arrears. 股利. Okay, also they will get this year's dividends. 当期的股利. Okay? Okay, here. Any unpaid previous year's dividends is dividends in arrears. 提前股利. So that's a key difference. The key difference is you will get the dividends in arrears if you are cumulative preference shareholders. Okay, so here's the case. For dividends in arrears, that means what? For the past 2 years, if your company did not declare and paid cash dividend, okay, then you owed cumulative preference shareholders 2 years cash dividends. So we call it dividends in arrears, right? But for the cash dividends you owed to cumulative preference shareholders, we don't need to recall it. You don't need to. You just put it on note. You don't need to record any liabilities. Why? Because we've mentioned when the liability incurred when you declare dividends. So when you declare dividends, the liability will happen. Okay? If you forgot it, We've mentioned 3 days right here. When your company have the liability for dividends, only when you declare it, when you announce, release the information. Because when you announce, release the information, then that's your promise. You cannot cancel your promise. But when you did not declare the information, it's not your liability yet. It's not your obligation yet. Since it's not your obligation liability yet, do you need to recall it? You don't need to, but you just put the information on the note, okay? So for dividends in arrear, because your company didn't declare it, you didn't declare it. Since you didn't declare the cash dividends, so you don't have obligation, you don't have the promise, so they won't be your liability. So you don't need to recall anything for dividend in arrear, okay? But for the next year, if 2021, when you declare a cash dividend, then that's your liability. You should tell that you have a dividend payable increase. Okay? So whether it's your liability or not depends on you declare dividend or not. 宣告股利或没有。Okay, so for dividend in arrears, you just put it on note. Okay, so here's the case. For the case, how can we allocate the cash dividends? So in 2019, December 31st, your company have 2 kind of shares. First is cumulative preference shares. Remember, cumulative. The keyword is cumulative. 累积特别股. Okay? So cumulative means what? Even though your company didn't declare cash dividends, 未宣告股利, don't forget, in the future, eventually, you should pay the cash dividends to the preference shareholders. Okay? 1,000 shares. Cash dividends is 8%. Par value, $100. You have a second share, ordinary shares, outstanding. Remember, we pay the dividends to outstanding shares. We don't pay the dividends to treasury shares. Okay? Outstanding shares, 500,000 shares. And your company declared cash dividends totally $6,000. Then, how to allocate the cash dividends to these 2 preference shareholders, okay? So that's the problems. So how to allocate it? Before we go to that, what's the journal entry we use? The journal entry we use totally for the $6,000 on declaration date is, that be what? Cash dividends, $6,000. You have a liability dividends payable, $6,000, right? So when we record the journal entry, you just record the total amount is enough. On declaration date, total cash dividends, $6,000. That means you have a liability increase. Okay? But the next, we want to know for that $6,000 cash dividends, how to allocate it to preference shareholders, to ordinary shareholders. Okay? Okay, so based on the concept, since you understand how to allocate the cash dividends when your preference shares is non-cumulative or non-cumulative, okay? So based on this, please go to the note on page 17 and 18. 17 and 18, okay? So go to your note 17 and 18. Please finish 17 and 18. After you finish it, then come back. Okay? So please right now pause the video and finish the note on 17 and 18, this table. Okay? Okay, sorry, you should know the problem is on page 16. So sorry about that. The problem is on page 16. So page 16 told you your company, yeah, we just mentioned that, right? So your company on 2019, you have the cumulative preference shares. Yeah, we just mentioned that. You have another ordinary shares outstanding, two kinds of shares. And your company declared $6,000 cash dividends. Okay, $6,000 cash dividends. So that's for 2019. But your company on 2020, second year, declared $50,000 cash dividends. Okay, so based on that, please finish page 17. Okay, write down the journal entry and tell me how to allocate the cash dividends to preference shareholders, to ordinary shareholders. Okay, and also please finish this table on page 18. We make another assumption. If you don't have a dividends in arrears, okay, then how to allocate the cash dividends. Okay, so welcome back. I hope you've done your job. Okay, then right now let's look at if you did the right thing or not. So the first year, 2019, for this year, declaration date. Here we just focus on declaration date. So we didn't mention payment date, but it doesn't mean that payment date is not list, okay? So declaration date we've mentioned on this year, 2019, your company declared, sorry about that, your company declared $6,000. Second year, your company declared $15,000. Okay, so for that $6,000, that made your cash dividend increase. Dividend payable increase $6,000, right? So when we write down the journal entry, you just write down the total amount. That's enough. Okay. How about the second year declaration date? Because we didn't talk about the payment date right here. Okay. So totally you declare 宣告股利 $50,000. Okay. So that means your cash dividends increase $50,000. But here is declaration date, so you didn't pay the dividends yet. So you have a dividend payable liability increase $50,000. Okay, so that's a journal entry. But right now we focus on how to allocate the cash dividend to preference shareholders, ordinary shareholders, right? Okay, so here, because the problem told you your preference shareholders, they are cumulative. So remember, you should understand the key word, cumulative. So it means what? Even though this year they cannot get the cash dividends, but they will eventually in the future. Okay? So for your preference shareholders, they are cumulative. 累积特别股东 cumulative. So they will get the dividends, okay? If not today, not this year, they will in the future. So let's look at 2019 first. 2019 totally $6,000. So we try to allocate the cash dividends to preference shareholders and ordinary shareholders. So for preference shareholders, how much they will get? Go back to the problem on page 16 told you preference shareholders got the fixed amount, 8% of the par value. And total, how many shares? 1,000 shares. So that's the cash dividends they will get for preference shareholders, 特别股东. Okay, so 8%, par value 100, totally 1,000 shares. So they will get fixed amount of cash dividends should be $8,000. But what's the problem? The problem is this year your company only paid $6,000. Okay? So for preference shareholders, totally they have the right to get $8,000. But this year your company only paid $6,000. Okay? So it means what? Your company still owe them cash dividends. How much? $2,000. So that $2,000 we call it dividends in arrears. Because they are cumulative preference shareholders. So cumulative preference shareholders, it means the cash dividends your company didn't pay, you should pay in the future. So for that $2,000, your company had to pay in the future. Okay? So this year, there's $6,000 we paid to the preference shareholders. Then how about the both ordinary shareholders got zero, nothing, because they got the remaining, right? So remaining zero. And don't forget, you still owe the preference shareholders $2,000. Now how about next year? Next year, 2020, your company total pay $50,000. Okay? So for that $50,000, how much you should pay to the preference shareholders? For the preference shareholders, because they are accumulated, so they will get not only this year fixed amount. So $8,000 means always each year they will get the fixed amount $8,000. But don't forget last year your company owe their money, right? Owe them that $2,000. So for preference shareholders, they will get two amounts of money. First amount of money is dividends in arrears. The cash dividend your company owed $2,000. Okay? And also including this year, always they will get a fixed amount of cash dividend $8,000. So that's a total cash dividends they will get $10,000. And how about the shareholders got the remaining? So what's the remaining? $50,000 minus you give it to preference shareholders $10,000. So they got the remaining $40,000. Okay? After that, do you still owe the preference shareholders any cash dividends? No more. So you don't have any dividends in arrears anymore. Okay? Yeah, that's how we allocate the cash dividends to preference shareholders, to ordinary shareholders. So when you try to allocate cash dividends, you should be careful. Your preference shareholders, they are cumulative or non-cumulated. 在分配现金股利的时候要小心，特别股东是累积特别股东或者非累积特别股东。Okay, so here we made another assumption. So for this table 2020, we assume the company don't have any dividends in arrear. We made this assumption. So this table is not about the same case on page 17. It's not, okay? We just made assumption. What's the assumption? In 2019, your company don't have any dividends in arrear. If in that case, so preference shareholders just got $8,000 they should get each year, right? So your ordinary shareholders got the remaining. So what's the remaining? $50,000 minus $8,000. So got the remaining. Okay? So here we made this assumption. So you will find out ordinary shareholders, preference shareholders will get the different numbers. Okay? So that's the video, second video for cash dividends. Next video, we will talk about share dividends, 股票股利。